struggle begins. Begin war.
Good morning, Virginia Democrats, or good afternoon, rather. I'm really excited to be with you all this afternoon for our last day of our first ever virtual convention. I want to thank everybody for joining in the first 2 days of this process. It's been really exciting to hear from our in-state leaders, but also from leaders across the country who really inspired us and fired us up and really focused us on the goal that we have here, which is making sure that we take back the White House, keep and expand our majority in the House, and take back the Senate. I wanted to remind all of our delegates that voting is open right now. You all can vote between now and 7 o'clock tonight. Make sure that you check your email for your unique code. And if you have any questions, please email us, political@vademocrats.org. Whether it's myself, Sham, or Khaled, we'll make sure that we get back in touch with you in a really up-to-date and concise manner. I wanted to start today. We have a special guest to kick off the day before we go into our first panel discussion. And so I wanted to turn the floor over this morning to our Lieutenant Governor, Justin Fairfax, to start the day. So Lieutenant Governor Fairfax, I will turn it over to you to kick us off.
You will be at the center of what we do as a Commonwealth.
Hello, Virginia Democrats. It's Lieutenant Governor Justin Fairfax, and excited to join you all virtually for this 2020 DPVA State Party Convention. And I want to thank all of those who are working so hard on behalf of our party and also on behalf of all 8.5 million Virginians, which I'm very proud to represent as Lieutenant Governor. We are at an incredible and defining moment in the history, not only of the Commonwealth, but of our nation. This is the first year of the next 400 years of Virginia and of America. And we are faced now with challenges unlike any we have seen in my lifetime. We have the triple crisis regarding COVID-19 pandemic. the economic crisis that has followed, and also now a crisis in policing and police brutality and civil rights. And so we as Democrats are the party who we're best equipped to meet this moment and these challenges, to make sure that no one is left out of the promise of our nation, that we are keeping people safe, we're helping them and their families to rebuild and to get to a place where we have a more just, more fair society with opportunity for everyone. And so here in Virginia, the place where so much history began, we're going to make a new kind of history by charting a different course here in 2020. And I am confident that if we all work together, we continue to capture the energy of the people, as we've seen in protests and rallies for justice around this nation, that we will be successful in making sure that Donald Trump is out of the White House. It is so critical that we do that this year. Also, that we send our fantastic senior Senator Mark Warner back to represent us in the U.S. Senate, and that we make stalwarts like Congressman Bobby Scott not only go back to Congress, but continue to chair the Education and Workforce Committee and the extraordinary work that he has continued to do. So we've got to keep our Congress in the hands of Democrats and make sure that we win the Senate, keep the House, and effectuate change that people are crying out for all over this nation. And so it's with the energy that we saw first here in 2017 when we predicted and then made it so that Virginia would be the match that sparks the wildfire of progressive change all around this country and ultimately really all around the world. And that wildfire of progressive change continued into 2018. And despite the odds, continued into 2019. And we continue to build upon that record of change and of improving the lives of all 8.5 million Virginians. And it will continue now in 2020. This is a critical election year. And we often know that it's said that this is the most important election of our lifetimes. But in this case, I believe that is exactly the case, because we have someone in the White House who is being aided by Republicans in the Senate and in Congress who are not holding this president accountable. They have been completely reckless, have taken this nation down a very dark political road. And we have a chance now on behalf of our children and our grandchildren and people of every faith, race, background, gender, identity, and expression to make sure that we are raising America up to its highest values. And so we have seen some really hopeful and impactful decisions out of the U.S. Supreme Court with regard to equality. It was something that so many of us have fought for so long, and I want to thank and congratulate all those champions who are making us a more just society and making sure that equal justice under law is in fact written into the law. And then just today, the decision out of the Supreme Court protecting our dreamers. And that is another powerful statement that we are going to lift this nation up to its highest ideals, to include everyone in the promise of this nation. But there's so much more work to be done.
The Lieutenant Governor for the Commonwealth of Virginia, Justin Fairfax.
We have many more Confederate monuments than just the statues that exist here in the city of Richmond and around the Commonwealth of Virginia. Those Confederate monuments include substandard schools that kids are going to that are dilapidated, that are shrines to an ideology of inferiority of Black and brown children.
And Virginia Democrats, we know that this 2020 election is the most important election of our lifetimes. We have to ensure not only that we get Donald Trump out of the White House and stop the damage that he's done to this country, but that we elect a really outstanding public servant, Vice President Joe Biden, as the 46th president of the United States of America, so that he can begin to heal this nation, to lift everyone up. And we know that we can bring about the change that America and the world so desperately need and are crying out for. We know that we are the party of progressive change, that lifts everyone up. We have Senator Bernie Sanders, who embodies that spirit of change. We have so many leaders in our party, but we also have the people on our side. And that's the most important thing, because the energy of the people that we are seeing right now is going to change the reality in our nation and around the world. The Supreme Court is on the ballot in 2020. Immigration reform, protecting our dreamers for the long term, is also on the ballot. Policing and criminal justice reform are on the ballot. Educational opportunities for our young people is on the ballot. And just this week, I announced a plan, a 40-30-10 educational plan, which is transformational. It would rebuild all K-12 public schools in the Commonwealth of Virginia that are 40 years old or older by creating a $30 billion investment fund and rebuilding and reimagining each of those schools over the next 10 years. So we want to build community schools that serve our children and those communities that surround and support them. We also have proposed to raise teacher pay above the national average. Right now here in Virginia, our teachers are paid more than $8,000 less than that national average, and that's something that we've got to change and pay our teachers what they are worth for the incredible work that they do every single day for our children. We also want to guarantee every young person in Virginia between the ages of 14 and 24 a summer job or enrichment opportunity so that they can pursue their careers, grow their skill sets, and make sure that their futures are even brighter. So now is the time for those transformational, intergenerational investments in the future of the Commonwealth of Virginia. And even as we rightly tear down the statues of bronze and stone to the Confederacy and to racial oppression in Richmond and all throughout the Commonwealth of Virginia, we also have to tear down the living monuments that carry that racial oppression from generation to generation to generation. And those are our unequal schools that we are now proposing to change for generations to come. Those are inequalities in our criminal justice system and in policing, something that is urgent and that we have to meet right now at this moment to honor the lives of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery and so many other people whose vibrant, beautiful lives were turned into hashtags by injustice. And so we fight for them too. We have living monuments to racial oppression and inequality in our healthcare system and in our housing system. And so right now, in this first year of the next 400 years, we can take our Commonwealth and our country on a very different course. We can write a story of hope and of opportunity and of justice and fairness for everyone. So I am so proud to join each one of you in this work. I'm grateful for your commitment to ensure that we are lifting everyone up and that we are all rising together. And I'm honored to represent 8.5 million Virginians as Lieutenant Governor. And I'm honored to be a Democrat, because I know that Democrats not only know how to win, but we know how to raise everyone up and to create a better future for all. So thank you all for your commitment. Please continue in this fight for justice, for fairness, and for opportunity. And I look forward to marching on with you to victory. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Mr. Lieutenant Governor, for joining us today. We appreciate your comments and your words to kick us off. You all are in for a real treat today, particularly with this first panel. I want to take a little bit of time to introduce them this morning or this afternoon. We have with us 4 really great Virginia Democrats, leaders in our Commonwealth, to talk about a topic that is really important for us as Democrats and for us as all Virginians to really address the impacts of COVID-19 and how it has impacted our Commonwealth and our country. We have with us this morning somebody that probably needs, or all four of them probably need no introduction, but I'm going to do it anyway. Our Senate caucus chair, Senator Mamie Locke. She has been on the forefront of all of these fights. She is just, Democrats, let me tell you, you don't want any more or anyone in your corner other than Mamie Locke, because she will fight for you until the end. And we're really lucky to have her today. We also have Senator Jen McClellan, who I'm sure a lot of folks know made a pretty exciting announcement a couple of days ago. So, Senator, we're happy to have you with us as well. Congressman Don McEachin, Congressman, we're happy to have you as well. We know you have a pretty big day coming up on Tuesday, and so we'll give you the floor to talk a little bit about that. And then we also have somebody who is really influential and taking back the majority and just doing all the work when nobody gets she doesn't get all the headlines. She doesn't get all of the quotes. But let me tell you, Trim, when she fights every single day to make sure that Virginians of all backgrounds, of all colors, of all ages can fight and live a life here in Virginia that we all should. And so, Tram, I know that you're moderating this discussion today, so I'm going to kick it over to you, and then I will come back after you all are done. So, Tram, take the floor.
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you so much for having me today. I'm so excited to moderate this panel, not only because it's an important topic to discuss, but because I get to join such amazing leaders. My own Congressman, Donald McEachin, my own state senator, Jen McClellan, and then Senator Mamie Locke, as Andrew said, needs no introduction. She's just a fierce fighter. We're going to talk a little bit today about COVID-19 and really more the disparate impact on racial minorities, right? On Black and Brown folks. When the coronavirus hit, many of us who do a lot of work in the General Assembly, whether as legislators like Senator Locke and Senator McClellan, or as advocates such as myself, we were sort of so embroiled in that when we emerged, it was like, oh, wait, there's this thing out there that people have been talking about and fighting and trying to address for some time, and that's COVID-19. We have seen in Virginia that, the Latinx community, for example, has been hammered by this pandemic, where even though it's only 10% of the population, 45% of cases, positive test cases in Virginia, are of the Latinx community. There's a 35% hospitalization and 11% death rate among folks. We know that Black people have the highest rate of hospitalization as a result of COVID-19. So the racial disparities are real, but it's also not surprising, right? We are in the midst of not only a public health crisis, but a social and economic crisis, and there are disparities across all of our systems. So that's what we're going to address today. And I'd first love to just get y'all's thoughts on COVID and the racial impact. And I'm going to first kick it over to Congressman McEachin to share a little bit about how you're seeing racial disparities in infections in Virginia, and what are some of the policies and some things that at the congressional level we can address.
Well, thank you, Tram, and it's good to be with you. I miss you from my days in the General Assembly, and to Mamie Locke and to Jennifer McClellan. It's good to be with both of you all, and thank you for all the work that you're doing for Virginians in the General Assembly and elsewhere. Tram, that's a great question that you've asked, and a keen observation that you've made. And to my mind, the issue comes down to one concerning environmental justice. The reality is that brown folks and Black folks and the poor oftentimes find themselves trapped in areas with poor water, poor air, faced with stay-at-home orders, and oftentimes they're staying at home in public accommodations, public housing rather, and that housing is subject to mold, that housing is subject to poor ventilation. It creates respiratory problems to begin with, and then when you take COVID-19, which attacks the respiratory system, and put that in place, you have a recipe for a disaster. And so I, along with a number of other Democrats in the House Democratic Caucus, are trying our best to forge environmental justice legislation that will help folks deal with their problems. For too long, the EJ community has been dictated to from Washington as to what the answers ought to be. Chairman Raul Grijalva, who is the chair of the Natural Resources Committee, along with myself, put forward a bill that actually goes to them, goes to the EJ community and says, what do you need? And then let us build on top of that and give you and empower you to execute your own answers. So I'm going to yield the floor in just a second, but to me, the most important thing we can do is, number one, fix the environment. And number 1A is get deeply involved in environmental justice issues to make sure that the poor, the voiceless, brown folks, black folks have a seat at the table and have clean air, clean water, and clean living conditions.
Thank you, Congressman, and you're absolutely right. Environmental justice is so important, and folks aren't necessarily talking about it, and it's not as front and center in some communities as in others. Senator Locke, I'd love to get your reflections on COVID-19 and the racial inequities that you're seeing.
What I would like to point out is that there was an article in the Richmond Free Press in 2017. So 3 years before this pandemic even hit us, that addressed the issues of racial disparities in Virginia's healthcare system. So it addressed this, even before we started talking about a pandemic. And it talked about how African Americans suffered from an array of chronic health conditions like diabetes, hypertension, heart disease, and asthma at a much higher rate than other racial and ethnic groups. So not only are these diseases more prevalent, but access to care and treatments are also unequal. So these health disparities and inequities and gaps in treatment existed long before the pandemic. So what the pandemic did was to take off that scab of the disparities that existed before it even came on the scene. So the pandemic has laid bare the staggering cost of decades of disinvestment and inadequate care in Black and Brown communities across this country. So I think that this disinvestment and the environmental injustice that Congressman McEachin talked about is what we need to begin to address and begin to make the necessary investments up to access and to care that has been ignored for many, many years.
Thank you, Senator Locke. And Senator McClellan, would love to hear your thoughts.
I agree, and I would just add that it's important to recognize that systematic inequity is across our system. So in addition to the environmental justice issues and disparities in healthcare, you have to look at the disparities in our economy and economic policy. And so we have seen that Black and Brown people are predominantly in some of the front-facing, low-wage jobs that we now see are essential. And I'll take domestic workers for an example. We have about 60,000 domestic workers in Virginia. Over half of them are women of color, and they are on the front lines trying to keep homes and safe and caring for parents and the elderly and children, and yet they were exempted in Virginia law from minimum wage, unemployment compensation, workers' comp, and anti-discrimination practices. So when the crisis hit, they literally had to choose between going to work and trying to survive economically, but putting themselves in harm's way and putting themselves on the front line to get the illness. Similarly, you look at where some of the cases are spiking, long-term care facilities where Black and Brown people are that have been lack of investment in ensuring that those homes have, or those facilities have the tools that they need. Prisons and jails where disproportionately inmates of color. So you have to look across all systems and see how they are interconnected to create either healthy or vulnerable communities. So you're right, it should come as no surprise that Black and Brown people are disproportionately impacted, because they're disproportionately impacted by every single system that works together in our society.
Thank you. And you all are so right. Everything is so interconnected, and we have a lot of work to do to make sure that the systems that we put in place or we start to replace actually center and put our Black and Brown communities and our most vulnerable folks front and center. I want to piggyback a little bit on what Senator McClellan mentioned around the economic impact of COVID-19. And this next question is for you, Congressman McEachin. What should Congress be doing to help lessen some of the economic input? We know that the extended unemployment benefits are going to run out pretty soon, and Republicans seem pretty unwilling to negotiate anything, negotiate a much needed aid package. So in the short term, right, I know we have a lot of long-term work we have to do to dismantle some systems, but in the short term, what are Democrats in Congress focused on in terms of helping alleviate some of the immediate short-term economic impacts of COVID?
Well, what we've already done, Tram, is we passed what we call the HEROES Act. And the HEROES Act does exactly what you just mentioned. It takes the unemployment benefits that the federal government is adding to the state benefits, $600 a week, and extends it for an additional period of time. It does some other things. It gives more relief to states and localities because we know our states and localities need to continue to provide the services that they are providing. Sadly, Mamie and Jennifer are going to have to go into special session soon and deal with some budgetary issues that are going to be unpleasant. Well, we passed in the HEROES Act monies that would relieve them of that responsibility that the state could draw down on. We did the same thing for localities as well. In addition to providing those services, those needed services, those social services, we don't want those people laid off either. We don't want to see officers laid off. We don't want to see nurses laid off. We don't want to see, the folks who have to collect refuge laid off. So we provide those monies to help continue their employment as well. The problem, of course, is Mitch McConnell and the Republican Senate. They have let the HEROES Act just linger on Mitch's desk, languish, I should say, on Mitch's desk with no end in sight. Now, I will say there is a couple of rumblings from some Republican senators who are up for re-election, who are in some tough races, who are pushing to have some sort of action, but nothing's happened yet. And so I would encourage our Virginia Democrats to pick up the telephone. You don't have to call Tim Warner. You don't have to call Tim Warner. Wow. You don't have to call Tim Kaine or Mark Warner. But you do need to tell your friends in other states to, if they have Republican senators, to demand some action. It doesn't have to be the bill exactly the way we passed it. We understand the notion of compromise, but something needs to happen out of the Senate so we can get those monies that are so desperately needed down to the localities. In addition, the HEROES Act has monies along the lines of that $1,200 that we did earlier to individuals. And as I already said, extends the unemployment benefits. All that is necessary for folks. Mitch McConnell wants to take a pause, but no one's pausing your rent checks. No one's pausing your mortgages. No one's pausing your grocery needs. All these things continue on. Life continues on while the Republicans hit pause.
Thank you, Congressman. One of the other big issues as it relates to the economic crisis is housing, right? And we've been hearing a lot from renters in particular about insecurities on whether or not they're going to be evicted. And currently in Virginia, there is a moratorium on evictions, but we also know that when that clock runs out, folks are going to be hitting a crisis. And as it relates to public health, right? If you are able to be at home, if you're able to stay safe without having to be exposed to the public and not having to be, evicted from your house. It's really important for public health as well. So curious, either Senator Locke or Senator McClellan, what are your thoughts on policies or things that can be done to help keep people in their homes, and especially renters that are more vulnerable right now?
Sam, you're correct in that we did get a pause on evictions with Judge Lemon extending it through June 28th, but that's this week or within the end of this month, where there is a pause on evictions until that time, to give the governor a little bit of time to try to come up with some kind of comprehensive rent relief program for those who are facing evictions within this climate. And as Congressman McEachin mentioned, they don't have the luxury of this pause, of having to pay rent and having to pay for utilities, and having to come up with even the back rent. So they're going to have to begin some kind of process of negotiating with their landlords in terms of some kind of plan of being in their homes or facing homelessness. So we are going to go into special session at some point, but it's not going to be before that June 28th deadline. And fortunately, we have our friends at the Virginia Poverty Law Center who are working feverishly with plans to work with tenants on with efforts to try to come up with efforts to work with individuals to figure out ways to stay in their homes, and landlords can still give tenants the 5-day pay or quit notices for non-payment of rent during this eviction ban, but renters cannot be legally removed from their homes while the ban is still in effect. But the governor is still kind of working feverishly to come up with this relief plan while through the 28th. But right now, we still don't know what that's going to look like until such time as we can come up with a plan while the eviction moratorium is in effect.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, we are also looking at some things that are going to require legislation when we come into special session. For example, right now we know some landlords are doing sort of unlawful self-help evictions, not waiting for the courts. And so I think we're probably going to have to do some legislation to deter actions like that. And then I would add, and this is sort of a plea to Congressman McEachin, we're also going to need some mortgage relief, because it's not just renters, it's also homeowners, and in some cases the landlords themselves who are going to have a big bill due when the moratoriums are lifted, and utility customers. The state corporation put in place a ban on utility disconnections through August 31st to allow the General Assembly to come up with a plan to address that as well. And so we will have some more specifics as we go into the special session of what we can do in addition to what Governor Northam can do under his executive authority. But we are going to have to address these in a way that doesn't just assume when the moratoriums lift that magically people will be able to pay their bills when they haven't been able to work.
Let me just slip in real quick, Tram, that at the federal level, if you have a federally backed mortgage and that is the way you purchase your apartment complex or what have you, we have given you the ability to go ahead and defer payments on federally backed mortgages. So that is one form, and we encourage you to pass on that relief to your tenants. As to the rest of the marketplace, we're currently working on trying to come up with some solutions that will come out of financial institutions the Financial Institutions Committee, but there are conversations about that. One idea that a constituent gave to me is why not tack on the past due payments to the end of the lease or to the end of the mortgage, so that if you have 20 years left on your mortgage and you've missed 3 months, you have 20 years and 3 months left to go. That way, you don't have to worry about the catch-up piece once things start. Once you start to have revenue to pay your bills again, you don't have to worry about catching up the mortgage. You just start paying the mortgage again, and you'll extend it for whatever time period that you missed it. So we are trying to come up with solutions that are equitable, fair, and can apply to all 50 states.
And if I could add on the issue of utilities, the utility bill doesn't go away. It's still going to be there. And whether it's someone who's paying a mortgage or someone who's paying rent, they still are going to have to pay that bill. So in some way, that needs to be negotiated as to how they're going to pay it, whether it's going to be a payment plan or some means of how is that individual going to pay that bill. So something has to be negotiated there as well.
I think that's absolutely right, Senator Locke. One of the things that I keep hearing every day from folks that we work with in the community is, you know, how are we, when all these bills come due, how are we going to make it, right? It's not just the housing issue. It's not just utilities. It's everything. And especially when people have been out of work for so long. And the economy is slowly starting to open up and people are slowly starting to surface and get back to work. But the pandemic is still out there, right? And so there's still a lot of worry and there's still a lot of concern among folks. What are some policies that Virginia can put in place to prevent or mitigate a second wave? You know, we've been pretty good so far, and the rates of positive cases have started to really have a steady decline, and we're getting into a place where we feel pretty comfortable with entering. You know, we're in phase 2. We'll likely enter phase 3 soon. How do we prevent a second wave, especially as the months go on and we're all going into summer when folks are going to be really eager to get back out into the public? What are some things that we can put in place? And maybe this is something for Senator Locke or Senator McClellan to address.
I think we need to recognize that even as the state begins to open up into phase 1 and phase 2, that there is still a pandemic out there, and people need to understand that is the reality, and that the reality is that there is no cure, that there is no vaccine for this communicable disease, and that one needs to follow the CDC recommendations for this virus, and that those recommendations need to be followed religiously. And that is the social distancing, the hand washing, the recommendations that have been put in place as we move into both phase 1 and phase 2 for the reopening of the state. And we've seen some of the actions that people have been taking with not wearing masks, you know, and not following social distancing, and that the only thing that that's going to do is to open us up to going backwards. And we don't want there to be, and we're still in phase 1, you know, of this pandemic. And we don't want that to happen to us. So we have to follow the CDC guidelines if we want to continue to see the downward trend and the flattening of the curve. So what I ask of those of us out there is to simply follow the guidelines so that we can continue to see the downward trend.
I would just add to that we need to ensure that we have sufficient PPE and cleaning supplies, masks, testing, access to testing. And honestly, I think we need to do a better job communicating in some of our communities that are not getting information online or from the television. And I think about some of the neighborhoods in my own district where families normally get their information from flyers put in their kids' backpacks. Well, they're not getting that now. In many cases, their telephone has been disconnected. They don't have access to the internet. They don't have, some of these communities don't have testing, free testing events. And even if they do, they're skeptical and don't understand why they need it. They don't understand why they need a mask, that there is a mask mandate, or even how to get or make one. And so we need to do a better job of just communicating in some of our vulnerable communities so they understand how to do the things that Senator Locke has said. And we are working to try to do that at both the state and the local level.
Senator McClellan, you raised such a great point about making sure that information is getting out to everybody in the ways that people receive information. Once upon a time in a previous life, I used to do disaster recovery work, and I can't even tell you how important it is to make sure that it's not just translation into other languages. Sometimes it's actually the method of getting that information out. It's identifying trusted messengers within a community. When I did post Katrina work in the Gulf Coast, we were scrambling for weeks to try to figure out the best way to communicate to all of the people who didn't speak English, all the Vietnamese and Lao community members. And it turned out that there was just one lady who was the church lady, who, if you got information to her, it would just get out to everybody. And as soon as we found her in Bayou La Batre, Alabama, the rest of the state knew exactly how to proceed with the recovery effort. So I think it's right, especially when we're dealing with certain communities that don't have access to information in the way that most of us do, that we are doing everything we can, and we're getting really creative in terms of getting information out there. We said earlier,
Tram, if I could also add, what Senator McClellan said about the community testing, and there's also free community testing, and that as that free community testing is available, I think there is skepticism in many of our communities. And I think that those of us who are elected officials, it is incumbent upon us to be available in those communities, to get that information out to individuals in our communities, and to also be present ourselves to show individuals that this is not a bad thing to do because of that skepticism about the testing itself, and to be available to show individuals that this is something that they should be doing, and that it's free, and that it's available, and that this is something that they need to do in order to be safe.
That's right. Amen. We said earlier that COVID-19, I think it was you, Senator Locke, that said it basically just ripped a scab off of what we already know, right? That there are systems that have disparate impacts on racial minorities in Virginia and in this country. Now that the scab has, been ripped off, so to speak, and we have this opportunity to not only address the short-term crisis of COVID-19, but also we have an opportunity to imagine, how we move forward and where do we go from here. This question is for all three of you, and whoever wants to kick it off, feel free. But where do we go from here? How do we use this opportunity to really start thinking about, our healthcare system, our education system, our criminal justice system, thinking about environmental justice in such a way that we start to address holistically, our approach for the future, so that we all can thrive, whether, we are Black or brown, where we live, our zip code, our background. How would you reimagine Virginia at this point?
So I think the first step is to recognize that we need to rebuild our economy, our education system, our healthcare and economic safety nets in a way intentionally that addresses those inequities. And if we're just rebuilding to where we were on March 12th when the state of emergency happened, that's not good enough. And I think we really need to look at some of the lessons learned here, small lessons and big lessons, whether it's making sure that our safety net systems, let's take unemployment compensation. We were overwhelmed, and part of it was just trying to get a computer program set up for a deluge of cases. So that's the small stuff, but then it's sort of looking at each of our systems, and particularly our economic recovery, look to those sectors of the economy that not only survived but thrived to lead our economic growth. They're mostly necessity industries. And then look how we can realign our programs to recognize trends that were already happening that have been exacerbated by this crisis, and recognize that we need to adjust all of our policies to meet those trends and not just react, but think proactively, or what are the other trends that are still coming that have been exacerbated by that, and reimagine all of our systems accordingly.
And we also need to look at the fact that all of these issues are connected, that you cannot divorce one issue from the other, that the economic issue is connected to poverty, to education, to healthcare, and the reason why we have these health disparities is because of the lack of education. The lack of poverty is connected to the poverty is connected to the lack of education, the lack of a good job. That the reason why the individuals are in this service industry is because they don't have the right tools, but is because of the lack of education. The people are in impoverished communities because again, the lack of education, the lack of a good job. So you cannot divorce one issue from the other issue, that we're going to have to look at all of these things holistically, as you said, Tram, and we can't divorce one from the other, that we're going to have to look at everything together and begin to solve all of these things holistically in order to begin to wrap our arms around everything and to solve all of these things together. That the reason why we have these health disparities, and the reason why we had to, that the reason this pandemic opened all of this up is because it was a problem that already existed, and we didn't deal with it all these years ago. And the reason why we have Black and brown people getting this disease and dying now is because we didn't address it years ago. So now is an opportunity for us to start to address everything now. But we can't address just the health disparity. The health disparity is connected to economics, to education. So let's address all of this and connect all of these dots and talk about everything now, and not once the pandemic has passed and go back to business as usual. There's no more back to business as usual. We have to put policy together to solve the problems, and in that way, we won't have to come back to this again and again and again.
Amen.
That's right. So how do we do that? What can we do, right, as citizens, as activists, to help support this important work of pushing through a policy agenda that is going to address a lot of these systemic issues that you all have raised recently? What can we do to support the work?
Well, Tram, if I can start with that, the thing that you can do, which will be most helpful, is to stay engaged. I'm not necessarily saying you have to stay in the streets, although that's certainly an option. But stay engaged with your elected official. Call, write, make demands on them, participate in their elections, or either for them or against them. But make yourselves known that these are important policies and that our citizens won't rest until those policies are implemented. You know, one of the great things that I see going on right now is that Americans of every stripe are coming together, young, old, all sorts of different races combined together to push back against what they see as these systematic inequalities. That needs to continue. And I'm firmly of the belief that we are at a special point in time where we just might be able to implement some of these policies and make some of these changes if folks stay engaged. If 3 or 4 months from now we're busy watching, the NBA championships or Major League Baseball World Series, and we're not thinking about these things, then there's going to be a problem. The part of being an American, part of being a Virginian, is being a good citizen, and part of being a good citizen is staying engaged with your elected officials.
I wholeheartedly agree with Congressman McEachin that one of the things that the George Floyd murder unleashed was many people becoming involved and engaged, and I do not believe that that is going to stop. That many voices have been raised, many people have become engaged and involved, and they do not want just to, they want people to not just listen, they want change and policy change. And that policy change has to come from all levels of government, from local to federal. So that is what needs to happen. And those voices, I believe, are not going to simply stop with just marches and protesting. That it is going to continue to happen with those young voices becoming more and more engaged with, I think, running for office, picking up the phone, calling people, making more and more demands with, as the First Amendment says, redress of grievances.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, show up and make your voice heard, and particularly tell your stories. Our General Assembly and Congress and many of our local governments are more diverse than ever before, but we do not reflect the full diversity of the Commonwealth by any measure, and particularly life experience. So the domestic worker issue I raised, no member of the General Assembly, or very few, have ever been a domestic worker or may even have any experiences with domestic workers. But when Lincoln Mendoza came and told her story about how certain policies and safety nets we assume applied to all workers didn't apply to her, we made some change. We wouldn't have known that if we hadn't heard from Lincoln, if domestic workers hadn't have organized and said, this is the problem we face, and this is how we need you to address it. And so everyone needs to, yes, vote, that's very important, but then reach out to your representatives early and often and tell them your perspective, and make sure you're doing that every step of the way, because oftentimes you're telling your story and your perspective will open the policymakers' eyes to something they never even realized was a problem.
Thank you so much. So this is, I just want to thank our panelists for joining us today and having this important conversation, and for you all for joining and listening in. I don't know if you're like me or not, but early in the year, I was so ready to cancel 2020 between COVID-19, murder hornets, hurricane season coming upon us, and like all of the craziness, right? And I was like, let's just fast forward, let's cancel 2020. But I also think that right now, given all of the engagement that we are seeing from young people, from older people across the spectrum, taking to the streets, registering to vote, and just being more engaged in the conversation, I actually think that in 6 months, when we close the books on 2020 and we look back, because of all of these conversations that we're having and the high level engagement, we can actually look back and say that thank God we didn't cancel 2020, because it was the start of some of the greatest years that we have ahead of us. So just want to thank you all and thank you for this conversation. COVID-19 ripped a scab off, but now it's an opportunity for us to forge ahead. And I couldn't imagine doing it with any other folks than you all who are helping to lead the way in Virginia. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tram, again. You gave me chills whenever you said that, to be honest with you. We have to look at this year as a huge opportunity to take a step forward. I'm grateful for your friendship, your partnership, not only last year and taking back the General Assembly, but for future years, because we're going to expand on that lead. Senator Locke, thanks again for your tireless work to make sure that Virginia stays is an example for the rest of the Commonwealth. We haven't always been that, but because of your leadership, we are getting closer to that. Senator McClellan, thanks again for being here. We appreciate you as always. I know you are a very busy person, especially right now, and so we appreciate any time you can give us. Thanks again for your friendship and your leadership within the party. And then again, Congressman McEachin, we know especially right now, you are also a busy person, and we wish you well on Tuesday. So thanks again. I wanted to set up our next conversation because I know that every year we say this, and this year it's really not an exaggeration, that this is the most important election that we have in our lifetimes. We say it every year. Politicians say it as a hyperbole, but this year it means something more, and it is something even more important than we could ever imagine. And so we have a panel today to talk about voting in Virginia. Not only the changes that we've made at the state level, thanks to a couple of these leaders who are joining us, but also what we can do at the federal level to make sure that we hold Donald Trump accountable and that we continue to put in federal policy that will help with that. So we have a few folks joining us today. Senator Deeds was supposed to be here, but I think he's on the road. If you know Senator Deeds, he lives way out in Bath County, and so you never know if he's going to be there or not. Hey, I actually see him now. He's going to join us. And then we have Delegate Marcia Price. Let me tell you, Sia takes me to church every single day when I get on Twitter and look at what she's tweeting out. And so you all are we're lucky to hear from her today. Congressman Jerry Conley, he's been fighting the good fight up in Washington, holding this president accountable, this federal federal government accountable. We appreciate him being here, and it's all moderated by the fantastic Delegate Jay Jones, who also made some news a couple weeks ago. That I think you all, as Virginia Democrats, are going to get to know him a little bit more. So Delegate Jones, I'm going to turn the floor over to you, and I'm excited to hear what this panel has to say about the work that we've done in Virginia to expand voting rights. So Delegate, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Andrew, and it's a pleasure to be here with you this afternoon, and thank you for giving all of us the opportunity to talk about what I think is arguably one of the most important issues that we face year in and year out here in Virginia. But before I start, let me say welcome to all the state delegates and viewers at home who are watching us and who are joining us. I think you'll get a lot out of this panel. We are joined by three luminaries in the voting rights space in this state. And so I couldn't be more excited to talk to them and talk with them today. And let me also say happy Father's Day to all those who are watching, especially Congressman Connolly and Senator Deeds. Happy Father's Day to you guys. And we are so happy that you could join us. And so as we start on this, I think it's really important that we start, I think, at a sort of high level, right, at a top level, and talk about what's going on sort of federally. And so Congressman Connolly, I was hoping that you could talk about Donald Trump and his attack on the Postal Service and why it's so important that we have a fully funded United States Postal Service, and maybe a little bit more about voting by mail and how important that is for our efforts this year and beyond.
Thank you, Jay, and thank you so much, everybody, for being on. Let me just pick up on something that was said in the last panel, which was, I almost wish 2020 could be wished away. I feel the opposite. I feel 2020 is going to be a year of reckoning. And I think it's shaping up to be that. I think we're going to have the opportunity as a country, certainly Virginia as a state, to make a profound correction in the course of the country, racially, socially, economically. And I think it could be a profound moment for America that makes this a seminal election, different than others. And I think we have the chance for a profound repudiation of Trump and Trumpism and, frankly, his Republican enablers. It's a well-deserved repudiation, but I think it is building up. And so I'm looking forward to that reckoning and being part of it, as I know everybody here is as well. Let me just set the stage with respect, Jay, if I may, about postal. So if you look at what Republicans have done when they take over state apparatus, in all cases, they have immediately moved to voter suppression. They make no bones about it. Very tough, high threshold ID laws designed to discourage those who don't have easy ID and even to reject IDs that are perfectly valid, like student IDs. So your NRA, membership card is okay, but your student ID at a state university may not be. That's discriminatory on its face. They purged between 2012 and 2016. They purged 4 million voters from voting rolls in states they controlled, including 3 critical blue wall states, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Michigan. It was no coincidence that those states were lost by the narrowest of margins. 4 million voters, to put that in context, is the margin by which Barack Obama won re-election in 2012. Making sure that precincts or remote voting places are not common in minority majority communities or heavily minority communities. Just coincidence. Collapsing or eliminating early voting entirely, and making sure that there are very few places that they still have it where you can go and vote. Trump himself, I'll give him credit, at least he's honest. He has said 2 things in the last few months that kind of give away the game. One is, well, we don't want more people voting. That hurts us, Republicans. And secondly, he has said, I believe expanding voting by mail will actually hurt us, even though, by the way, ironically, he votes by mail. We know there's no empirical evidence that voting by mail actually favors one party or the other. We do know, though, that it expands the franchise. Like Don McKeechan, I have a primary this Tuesday in 2 days. In the last primary we had last year in my district, 1,300 people voted early by mail. Right now in my district, 45,000, 1 year later, have asked to vote by mail. So the demand is high, and I believe it's going to become a habit so long as the Republicans don't succeed in preventing it by law or practice. So that puts in context why, the centrality of the Postal Service. So in the middle of everything collapsing, right? We can't go to work. Maybe we've lost our jobs. Restaurants are closed. I can't go to a ball game. I can't see my kid's graduation. I can't go to work. I've got to socially isolate myself. I've got to wear a mask. I've got to worry about health, all that. Nothing is the same, with one exception. Every single day, I expect that postman or postwoman to come to my door or my mailbox and deliver the mail at roughly the same time every day without interruption. It is the one constant in our lives. And when it became, and by the way, it has very high approval rating. So if you ask the public, what's your approval of government in general? It's 17%. Used car salesmen are competing with government for approval rate. The Postal Service, 74%. It is the highest rated service of the US government there is. In fact, it's one of the highest services there is. And a lot of communities, the post office is a place of activity and social activity. The postman or postwoman is like a neighbor. We know them. We care for them. They're friendly. They're part of the community. So, and of course, it's the only service mandated in the Constitution of the United States. The only thing mandated to the government to provide for our citizens is the Postal Service. And remember, Ben Franklin was the first real Postmaster General of the United States before we even became a country in 1775. All right.
Right.
So Postal Service is hemorrhaging revenue and volume because of the COVID-19 crisis. It already was going downhill because of technology and market changes. But with the COVID-19 crisis, virtually all commercial advertising ended because businesses were closed. And so all of that collapsed with the revenue. They're losing about $3 billion a month. And they are scheduled to run out of cash sometimes this fall. The only part of the Postal Service that's growing is, as you might imagine, packages. And but packages only account for 5% of volume, about 30% of revenue, and growing. Now, so when Donald Trump says, hey, the only thing Postal Service has to do is raise what they charge packages, translation, charge Jeff Bezos and Amazon more, end parentheses. In fact, what you can do is triple or quadruple what you charge them, and you'll solve all the problems. Well, if it's only 5% of volume and 30% of revenue, you can see that that's not true. Secondly, if you did what he wants to do, and by the way, we already make a profit on Amazon and packages. If you do what he wants to do, you're going to drive business to UPS and FedEx because they're not going to quintuple or triple the cost of delivering their packages or yours. So it's a foolish thing to say. It's not true. It would, in fact, actually dry up the one part of the Postal Service that's making money and growing. We need the Postal Service. My subcommittee has jurisdiction over that, the Government Operations Subcommittee I chair. And we have recommended two things in the HEROES Act: a $25 billion cash infusion to stabilize, and a unfettered $10 billion line of credit, take away the conditionality the Treasury Department wants to impose. Now, that may sound like a lot of money, but remember, we provided $50 billion to the airline industry. And they were making profits in the last 6 years, record profits, that they reinvested in themselves with stock buybacks. The Postal Service has a universal service mandate in law, whether it makes money or not, and it has a uniform pricing system, right? So, that same 55-cent stamp on a letter to Baltimore is the same in Laramie, Wyoming, or an Inuit village in Alaska. So Postal Service is an essential service. People rely on it. They want it. And we're asking them now to undertake a new task. Help us broaden the franchise and secure the vote. And if they're going to do that, they've got to be stable. They've got to be solvent. They've got to be functional. They've got to be able to deliver quickly. And we're already seeing the consequences of the not quite being able to do that. At least up here, generally, the Postal Service doesn't deliver much mail on Tuesdays. So in my primary, if you didn't mail your ballot by Thursday at the latest, there's a good chance if you mailed it Friday or yesterday, that ballot will not get to the electoral board by Tuesday. So at any rate, those are some of the things we're dealing with. I'm sorry, but I wanted to give you a context of the Postal Service in the context of what we're talking about here, expanding voting rights and protecting voting rights. Thank you, Jay.
Well, of course, Congressman, I think you're exactly right, and you've hit on a whole host of issues that I think are incredibly important. And you talked about the voter suppression efforts that Republicans are open about across the country and have been for many, many years. And so what we have tried to do in the General Assembly is really expand access to the ballot box and make sure that everybody has a chance to make their voice heard. And that's why I think it is so important to hear from Senator Deeds, who is the chair of the Senate Privileges and Elections Committee, and Delegate Price, who is a longtime member of our Privileges and Elections Committee in the House of Delegates, about what our voting rights agenda is here, what we did this past session that we have been sort of stifled from doing for so long, why those measures are so important, and where we go from here looking ahead to 2021 and beyond.
Thank you very much. It's really interesting to hear about the post office from Congressman Connolly. I always understood there was a problem with funding of the pensions that the Republican Congress in the early part of this century imposed on the Post Service that other federal agencies don't have to deal with. And that's one of the long-term problems. And to me, that suggests a long-term bias against the Postal Service, which I agree is essential to our democracy. We did some important things this year. We for a long time, the Republicans in Virginia have promoted an agenda to limit access to the ballot box, to try to make it harder for people to vote, to try to and they've fueled the fire by talking about voter fraud, which really doesn't occur very often. I mean, when it occurs, we all agree it should be snuffed out, but it doesn't occur often. So we did some important things this year. Number one, we passed legislation that I know Janet Howell has carried for at least 16 or 17 years, and other people carried for years too, to make no excuse absentee voting. You know, there's no reason why you should have to give an excuse when you can't make it to the ballot box on the given date. If it were up to me, you'd have a weekend to vote. If it were up to me, there were a lot of things that we would do to make it easier to vote, but no excuse absentee voting for the 45 days prior to the election is an important change. I think it's going to increase voter turnout. The second thing we did that I think is really important is we did away with the photo ID requirement. You know, we broadened the IDs that people can use, like a college ID from an out-of-state school. You know, before we had allowed IDs from people who went to school in Virginia, but there are a lot of people out in the world where I live. There are a lot of people that go to school in West Virginia, or they go to school in Tennessee, or they go to school in North Carolina. Why shouldn't they be able to use those IDs too? Well, they can now. A third big thing we did that's going to have more of an impact down the road, because it doesn't take effect until 2022, is that we said you can register register to vote on election day. You don't. There's no cutoff. In other words, for registration to vote. This is a thing that has worked very well in places like Utah, for crying out loud. All over the country it's worked, and there's no reason to think that it won't work here, because we know it's going to have some cost, because we know it's a radical change in the way we've done things. We put off the implementation of that legislation till 2022. That's a bill that was introduced in both the House and the Senate. I think I carried the bill, or somebody, in any event, the bill was carried in the Senate and it died there. But by the time it got to the House, a couple of senators who weren't very smart about it the first time had wised up and passed the legislation.
Well, and I think you did a terrific job sort of summarizing that. Before I kick it over to Delegate Price, I just want to ask you, Senator Deeds, is that a Norfolk Tides hat that you've got on your head? And if so, go Tides. Can't wait for baseball to come back. There you go. I like it. Even up in Bath County, we've got support.
Hey, let me tell you, years ago, I had the great opportunity to run for governor. And one of the highlights of that gubernatorial campaign for me was to sit next to the official score at Harbor Park while the Norfolk Tides played baseball, and to talk about that. And that he said, well, you know, a lot of politicians come up here, but I got one question for you. Who's the greatest baseball player of all time? And I said, Ted Williams. He said, you're okay.
Well, I'm glad you passed the test. You know, we're tough down here in Norfolk and in Hampton Roads. But Delegate Price, what's next, right? Where do we go from here? Senator Deeds talked about all the great things that we did, but there's more to be done. And I know that this is right in your wheelhouse. So I want you to tell our delegates and tell those people at home what we're going to do next.
Thank you, Jay, and thank you all, and hello to the congressman and senator. And I'm going to be the consummate politician and answer the question that I wish you had asked before you go to the question that you did ask. But who knew that it would be a political statement to say, I went to the post office and bought stamps today? Like, who knew that that would be a way of resistance and protest? But here we are. And I think further connecting this conversation to the moment, this moment of reckoning, as was mentioned, I think we have to say thank you to the protesters who have forced conversations about systemic racism to the forefront of our everyday life right now. And so I want them to keep on that pressure so that we can excavate the ways that we need to change our systems in order to get them more just. So it's hard for me to talk about voting rights without talking about the history of how we got there today, talking about the history of how it's been withheld or manipulated for voting rights in order to wield power. And within that, I think that we have to make a choice that if we're going to say Black Lives Matter, one of the things that we have to do is show that Black votes matter. And so if you look at the symbolic and the proactive, so we passed House Bill 1086, which came from the commission that the governor had put together to go back through the code, pull out all the racist junk from the past, right? One of those was the establishment of the Virginia poll tax. So House Bill 1086, we pulled that out of the code. So symbolically, it was not in place in full, but we have now removed it to say that's not what we believe, that's not who we are. And we also have to uplift the story of Evelyn Butts, a Virginia seamstress who took that to court, won it, and got us to the moment where poll taxes, she fought Jim Crow in order to get poll taxes in Virginia to be pulled away. But taking it out doesn't create it or put something back in to make it more just and equitable, where people still have to pay for a stamp in order to send back their ballot. So there still is a financial obligation if you're voting absentee. So we have to continue to claw away at the things that, you know, these remnants of these historically race-based power dynamics are there. But then we have to continue to say, okay, within the governance realm, let's say, we have to proactively make sure that democracy is available to all. So Senator Deeds just ran through some of the things that we were doing to remove the obstacles. I would add something from session that we did was also House Bill 1255, which on July 1st will make racial, prison, and political gerrymandering illegal. We can't even talk about votes if we're not coming from just and community-based districts. And so we worked on that. We also allowed for absentee ballots to get there by the Friday after election, just so they are postmarked on election day. Because yes, we need some time for our things to get there. And, you know, automatic voter registration, if you go to the DMV, election day being a holiday, and so much more. And I do want to let folks know, you can Google in due course DLS and read a whole host of the bills by subject that we did and see all of the other election bills that we did too. But one thing that I want to point out is we talk about what's next. In 2016, in the presidential election, there was 17.3% statewide that voted absentee. 17.3%. So when everybody's talking about instituting a vote by mail system, while that sounds great, we have to ask some questions as we're establishing the system. One, what do we do with the people that on May 19th still haven't gotten their ballot that they requested? From Hampton Roads in Richmond, I'm hearing stories about that, including some of the constituents I serve. And we have to get rid of this idea of just posting information on websites that people don't know exist. We have to invest resources in doing outreach. If only 17.3% of people used something in 2016 and we're trying to jump up, then we also have to say, okay, hey, 60-year-old that has never missed an election day because you go in person every day, here's this other thing, just in case also if COVID were to come back, and making sure that people are safe. And so I think we have to continue as we're moving forward to govern such that equity is not a buzzword, and we understand that progress is expensive. So are we investing resources in unapologetically moving forward with this bold agenda, like the full front end of automatic voter registration, or being able to vote even if you accidentally show up at the wrong precinct so that you don't have to find somewhere that you don't know how to go. The constitutional amendment that declares voting a right, period. Right. So these are things that we can think of. And then there are also some less sexy things that we can do, you know, like curing ballots and things that, you know, don't often come up in dinner conversation, but are important to the system. And so I think that if we are also embracing redistricting reform, where Democrats aren't held to a higher moral standard while giving away most of our power. Like, there are some real things that we can do and accomplish. But then I would say, other than governance, Jay, on the other flip side of that, we have to see what are our party priorities as well. And when we have, you know, I loved it. I love seeing from top to bottom folks putting out statements in solidarity of Black lives and Black Lives Matters. Well, now it's time for us, for our inner workings, to show that. So what do our field workers look like? What does our targeting strategy look like? Are we going after the maybe Democratic voters? Or are we shoring up the base who, if we just give them energy and time and resources and a call, they'll show up and vote? And just what are we saying that lets them know government is for them too? You belong here, and Black lives really do matter.
Well, Sia, I think you said it very well and very eloquently, and you hit on something that I wanted to talk about that I think everybody on this panel has probably a different view, but I think we're all on the same page. I think for years, Democrats have been hit because we fail to market and we fail to message as well as the Republicans might, right? Donald Trump, you got to give it to him, is a master marketer, but we have the issues on our side, and we've got to really make sure that we're letting people know. And here in Virginia, we vote all the time, right? In the city of Norfolk, my people vote in May and June and November every single year, right? We have a tendency to have voter fatigue. And so people come out only in presidential elections or only in federal elections, maybe once or twice for a gubernatorial election every so often. So how can we, one, improve the confidence in our electoral system that Republicans have tried to undermine for so long? And two, how do we sort of take our message to the people in a way that we haven't done so far, right? We know that we can do better. So what do we do, right? Congressman Connolly, what are the effective tools for us to get to our voters to make sure that they know what's going on?
So you just touched on something I think is very important. Let's remember the legacy of the Harry Byrd tradition, which was to discourage voting and have only the right people vote.
Mm-hmm.
One vestige of that is how often we're asked to vote. Now, this year, being a presidential election year, if you live in my district in a town or city, you're going to vote 4 times this year. You're going to have 2 federal primary dates, not 1. Most states have consolidated. We haven't. So I voted in Super Tuesday for president, but I have to vote again in June for Congress and Senate. That's crazy. It guarantees low turnout, makes it hard. People don't understand. Why wouldn't you consolidate those 2? Elections for town and cities being in May is guaranteed to have low turnout.
Mm-hmm.
And I've heard even Democrats say, well, we want educated and informed people participating. Oh, really? The Irish were not welcome as voters in the Northeast when they started immigrating because they were ignorant, they were illiterate, they had a funny accent, and they had a foreign religion. And there were actually movements by abolitionist leaders to deny the Irish immigrants the right to vote in the 19th century. And on those terms, we want to broaden the franchise. If we want to do that, move elections to November. But asking people to vote 4 times in 1 year is guaranteed to have lower and lower turnout and to deny people the opportunity to be heard in their own local governance. And then
Senator, I see you raising your hand. You want to jump in?
On that point, Congressman Connolly,
yeah.
I think what we ought to look at as well is moving the state elections to federal years.
Yeah.
We shouldn't vote every year in Virginia. We should, if we're really interested in increasing turnout and allowing more people to participate, we wouldn't wear them out with elections.
I agree with Craig entirely. And the second point I'd make is picking up on what Delegate Price said. Count all votes that are postmarked the day of the election. We have an election 2 days. Don McEachin has a primary election. I have a primary election. We have an open primary election in the 5th, and we have a Republican Senate primary election. Mm-hmm. And I guarantee you there are going to be, in my district, thousands of ballots that will be discarded because they didn't arrive on Tuesday, as opposed to being postmarked. And I just think that's an easy fix. That even the Supreme Court of the United States allowed Wisconsin to do, but we can't do it here. And it breaks my heart that thousands of people in good effort in the middle of a pandemic are voting, assuming their vote will count when in fact it won't because it didn't arrive by Tuesday. So those are 2 fundamental reforms I think we need to look at. Consolidate. I agree with Craig. Try to federalize so that we have uniform elections. And reduce the number of elections that really help suppress turnout.
I think that's exactly right. And, before Marcy, I do want you to chime on this, but I think it's interesting, in 2018, Norfolk, we had school board elections. The first time we had popularly elected school board elections. So everybody in the city could vote on May 3rd, 2018. Turnout in a city of 240,000 people was 9.8%. I mean,
Wow.
It was abysmal to churches. And so I want everybody to realize that we're not just talking about federal elections and our state elections. We're talking about local stuff too. All of those things are so important. And we talk about how important your state and local officials are because we are the ones who are effectively in the towns with you guys all the time. That's why this stuff is important, and that's why this matters. And we want folks to get up and get out and vote. And, I think we as Democrats, being the Big Tent party that we are, who include everybody, right? Still have work to do to make sure that everyone is understanding and everyone knows what the deal is, right? Marcia, how do we do that?
Yes, I just want to be clear. We did the postmark thing. Like that is happening. It just didn't happen in time for this. It will pass. It passed, has been signed, but unfortunately, it doesn't go into effect until July 1st. I just, for the Senate, for the congressman, I get it. Like it didn't go into effect soon enough. But unfortunately, we wouldn't have had 80 votes probably for an emergency clause anyway. But I think a point needs to be made at how we are looking at voters. Are we looking at them as human beings that have experienced government for good or for bad? Or are we looking at them as numbers and, things, demographics that we can shift around for our own purposes? Voters show up when we show up. Voters show up when elected officials and candidates show up to talk about the needs and cares of their community and connect with us. Voters don't show up when they're taken advantage of and taken for granted. And so it's an interesting dynamic. Yes, is it something that everybody should do because it's their right and their obligation? Yes, but if we're not teaching that in schools anymore as an obligation, and we have a generation that's like, all right, come to me, tell me what you have to offer, and we're not showing up, then we can't be mad that people aren't participating within our own rules that we haven't taught them. And so part of this is opening up how we do democracy within our own party. And if we don't have the resources personally to reach out to some of the folks that we aren't sure whether or not they're going to show up or not, then do more investments in organizations that do that on a daily basis. But we can't, I think this moment that we're seeing and the explosive nature of this moment shows us that it's not a given. It is something that needs to be worked for and explained, but we have to also show some pretty significant differences between what the Democrats have done and what the Republicans done, and cue the Republican story of what the Republicans did. Well, those Republicans are not who we see in the General Assembly today. So they can't claim the old Republican Party. They're not freeing nothing right now. And so we really have to be very explicit about what it is that we're bringing to the table. What Senator Deeds and I just said doesn't even scratch the surface of what we have actually accomplished this past session and what we have in mind for next session, because we have so much to say about, elections matter. We have to do a better job of telling our story. We have to do a better job of saying, hey, do you enjoy this right and this privilege? Guess what? We're protecting it and expanding it. They're spending millions of dollars for you not to be able to express it. And so I think it's really meeting the people where they are, finding out what they're passionate about, and then differentiating ourselves where we can, but differentiating ourselves from the other party and what we've been trying to be progressive about.
I agree with Delegate Price, but there's the other side of the coin we cannot ignore. There is another party that doesn't want you to vote. So the burden isn't just one way. I got to prove why it's worth you coming out to vote. I got to fight their active suppression. And it is active. It's insidious. It's systematic. It's determined. And we have to root that out. And by the way, we might as well start calling it what it is. Voter suppression is racism.
Yes.
It's aimed at particular communities not voting. And that goes back to poll taxes, that goes back to literacy tests. It's the same old thing in a different guise. And if we don't call it out for what it is, we're never going to beat it.
Well,
And I think that's exactly right. And Senator Deeds, please chime in.
No, I was just going to say, at the federal level, you're seeing we've had election security issues over the last 2 years. Mitch McConnell has completely blocked all efforts to try to fix our elections from a national standpoint. And we need some national standards. We need to have some uniform rules. And we don't, because the federal government wants to minimize voter turnout. And they're looking at minimizing turnout by communities of color and poor people. I mean, that's the bottom line.
Right. And look, when we see long lines at polling places, I get happy because I know that means that our people are showing up, right? But you get a little bit upset because there shouldn't be long lines. Voting should be this easy, wonderful, joyful activity, right? We want our citizens to be able to go to the polls and exercise their right, which is, to me, fundamentally what makes us American, right? Is that we can go and exercise the right to vote for whomever we choose. and this is all rooted in history, right? We are all students of history on this panel, right? We know that election days are on Tuesday because that's when folks used to come to the market back in the early times of this country, right? Why shouldn't we be able to vote over the course of a couple of months? We know who we're going to vote for months before it happens. Why shouldn't we be able to do so? And then marshal our resources to go ahead and get folks there over the course of several months, right? So Senator Deeds, I have always admired you. I've known you for a long, long time. You've been incredibly successful electorally out in the rural parts of Virginia. I mean, do you have anything to say or any thoughts on how your experience out there with voting has been and how we can continue to engage folks, whether it's through technology or outreach going forward?
We just have to continue to tell the truth and meet people, as Delegate Price says, meet people where they are. I'm a native of this part of the world. I've gotten a lot of votes out here. I didn't win my home county this past election. I didn't win the two closest counties to me. And from a rural standpoint, I won the rural vote continued to win. And my opponent this time was an independent. It was a Republican that wouldn't even run as a Republican. Mm-hmm. I would suggest that we're not as good at marketing as the Republicans, probably because we're better at government. We focus on doing our jobs. We focus on trying to make government work better for people, and instead of developing a marketing plan. And we have to get better at that because you have to meet people where they are. And even though it looks as if there's certain congressional districts in the Commonwealth where we can't compete right now, or it looks like we can't compete in some counties and particularly in South Side and Southwest Virginia and the Shenandoah Valley, I would suggest that we as Democrats cannot give up on 1 square inch of the Commonwealth. Everybody deserves representation. And we know, because we've been there, we know that the other folks aren't really interested in representation. They're interested in just obfuscation and blocking people from voting, participating in the process. We do a better job at government. That's what we need to do.
I mean, Congressman, do you have thoughts about that? I mean, look, you served at the local level and now at the federal level. I mean, you've been through this before, right? What can we do to reach out, or how do we best sort of take our story and on the road and let people know, look, we want you to come vote for us, but above all else, we want you to vote, right? I mean, what are we not doing, or what are we failing to do, or how can we change our habits as a party to continue to grow and to reach out and to make sure that people are exercising their God-given right?
So, let me pick up as an example what Cree was just talking about, right? We're losing rural America. Rural America is, look at the Southwest Virginia. It used to be called the Fighting Ninth. It was solid Democratic. In the worst statewide years, we could always count on the Ninth to deliver Democratic. It was unionized. It was our people. Now, in the last election, when we were winning the state handily, we lost it 70-30. I mean, a wipeout. And so what's our rural agenda? And can we, going back to what Delegate Price said, meet people where they are. Okay, where are people, human beings? Well, you can't just appeal to their mind and reason. Surely you see, Jay, that it's important and morally right to provide affordable housing. Well, what about the people who don't acknowledge that as a moral issue? How do we appeal to their self-interest? And how do we also respect people's fears instead of labeling them and calling them irrational? Human beings are complex things. Logic and reason is only part of who we are. Fear and self-interest drive a lot of what we do and say. And I don't think Democrats are very good at acknowledging that or dealing with it where people are, as Delegate Price said. And I think we can compete when we start to do that, including presenting an agenda for rural America. Rural America, what Cree just said is profound. Not only do they not have their interest at heart, they're frankly euchering them day and night. So 130 rural hospitals, including in Lee County here in Virginia, have closed permanently. Some people have to drive 100, 150 miles to get medical service. The factories are closing. The schools are bad. Crime rate's up. The drug addiction is just rampant. Kids can't wait to get out of the community, but they're voting on gay marriage. They're not voting on their own economic self-interest. That's partly our failure. How can we engage with that electorate and with an agenda that makes sense, that respects their concerns, their values, but calls them to vote in favor of their own future and self-interest? We have failed in doing that. And I agree with Cree. competing in every part of the Commonwealth, in fact, every part of the United States, with an agenda that makes sense, we can start winning those elections in those parts of the Commonwealth and the country again.
Yeah, and you know what? I think you guys hit the nail on the head. And Marcia and I, who both represent urban districts, right, majority minority districts, would feel almost similar in some of the messages that you're talking about with rural America, right, or in rural Virginia. You know, we have citizens who feel left behind and left out and are disaffected and say, well, why would I vote? Because my vote doesn't matter. And I think part of that comes to how we draw our districts, which I think we are actively engaged in talking about as a party, but also, you know, our outreach and our approach to our citizens and our citizenry and what we're talking about and how we're talking to them, right, Marcia? I mean, please, I know this is something that you and I talk about offline all the time, and so I'd love for you to share some of your experiences and your stories and your thoughts on how we can reach out and grab everybody to make sure that, one, they vote for us, but two, that they're going to vote, period.
Yeah, I think that a lot of this, in order to fix the problem with the solution, we have to diagnose it appropriately. So I completely agree with the congressman. There's active voter suppression that is happening. I personally am seeing that Russian bots are a real thing and are impacting voters of color by distrusting vote by mail. I'm seeing it happen in my district and trying to address it. There's also a sense of passive suppression as well, where we have created systems that run on a daily basis without reaching out to the very people that we serve. So it sends this message of exclusion. So if you think about that happening within, let's say, a family for 4 generations, they have felt like government is against them, or there is some sort of exclusion, that they're not a part of it, then that message starts to resonate as well. And just like you said, Jay, why would you participate in something that doesn't include you, doesn't invite you, doesn't even let you know some of the information that would be very helpful to know how to interact? And then I think this idea of a disconnect, if I may be frank, a lot of this disconnect is we only talk to voters within September to November before our own election. So what does our social media look like? What do our messages to our constituents look like on a daily basis? If you are not extending your hand back into the community and helping them participate, you know, and I get it, it's hard. It's hard work to ask for somebody for their feedback, actually have to listen to it, especially if the feedback is something different than what you're trying to accomplish, but taking that very seriously so that they aren't feeling like they're being invited to participate just when it benefits the person that's offering the invitation. And so I think conversations throughout the year, off year, when it's not just us, we have to be able to ask, okay, we passed this thing. Have you felt the effects of it? Has it benefited you yet? Because we know it takes longer for some of these benefits to get to certain communities than the other. But just like you said, if we were to have something, you know, within the party where it was like urban and rural, sitting down, most of the things that we would discuss, they may manifest themselves in different ways, but the root of the issue is the same, and showing that, you know, Cree absolutely cares about all of the things that are impacting them on a daily life. He just also may think that, you know, on the marriage issue, that equality is the way to go. Not trying to speak for you, just using the example. But it's like, if we are going to be defined by 3 and 4 issues, just like the congressman said, we have failed. We have failed to tell our story of the 1,200 and something bills that we passed that are bettering the everyday lives of residents. And that's the story that in the narrative that we've got to get out.
You know, almost 30 years ago, when I came to the House of Delegates and I sat next to Delegate Jones' dad, he helped educate me in so many ways. And I came to see then that some of the urban problems and the rural problems are so similar, it's scary. We face the same challenges. We just have to get people to start understanding that it's not all about God, gun, and gays. It's about moving together forward. It's about creating opportunity for everybody.
And you look, I think all of that starts with voting, right? It starts with transparency. It starts with access, all of the things that we on this panel are committed to and those in our party are committed to. And so we just have a couple more minutes left before we wrap up. And so, Congressman, I want to give you the final word on this because you have your primary on Tuesday, but you know you're going to be on the ballot in November. What can we say or do, and how do we make sure that we are ready for November to get us to where we want to be, and the folks have confidence in our voting system, and that they can show up, or if they don't show up, that their ballot's going to get there or get there on time. I'll give you the last word.
Well, I want to echo what Delegate Price said. I think that there were, and Senator Deeds as well. I'm so proud of my General Assembly, first time in my lifetime. I can say that as a General Assembly, on the whole, they moved this state forward. You all, and you too, Jay, you all deserve credit. It was a very progressive agenda. It was common sense. It didn't alienate, except gun nuts. And it moved this state forward the way most voters kind of want. By doing that, we renew faith by the voters. You know what? My vote does matter. I just saw it. I just saw what happens when actually my vote elects thoughtful legislators who care about me and my community. And I think those, those are really important messages, very important narrative to get through. And I think, at least where I live, my voters are happy with what you guys did, and hopefully they'll be happy with me on Tuesday too. But we do need to engage where voters are. That doesn't mean we don't call them to a higher plane. That doesn't mean we don't sometimes provoke new thinking. But I have always found that you can take a progressive thought and not necessarily talk about it in normative terms, talk about it in practical and economic terms. It's in your interest that we have affordable housing, because if people have to live far away because they can't afford living near where they work, they clog up our roads. Labor becomes more expensive. Business can't afford them. You drive in business to a lower cost place. And, it's in your interest and my interest to have affordable housing. That's not a threatening message. And we shouldn't be embarrassed by the fact that, okay, I'm not appealing to the moral argument, because anyone who's motivated by the moral argument, we already got. We already got them. We got to appeal to everyone else. And we can. We've got a powerful economic message that's one of better equity, more opportunity. And we've got to propound that very aggressively. And we've, as I said, we really need to be pretty aggressive about calling out the Republicans for the neglect and the malpractice they're engaged in right now. I mean, even on the issue of life and death, they're willing to take a chance. Rather than have more people vote, they made them come to voting places in person in Wisconsin, jeopardizing health and lives. That's pretty fundamental. And we shouldn't be embarrassed to call that out for what it is, because that's the only way voters are going to understand the delineation between the two parties. Our values and our philosophies are fundamentally different. Ours is on your side. And let me tell you how. Theirs is, a small cadre of, fancy, rich one percenters, and everything else is kind of, window dressing. And that's actually a fundamental truth about the difference between the parties right now, sadly.
Well, I think that's exactly right. And I think that's an incredible way to close this panel out. And, I think we covered a whole host of voting rights issues today. And so I want to say thank you to Congressman Jerry Connolly, to Senator Creed, to Delegate Marcia Price for joining us today and sharing your thoughts and your wisdom. We know that we've got a lot of work to do, right? We put up a whole host of bills this session, and they come on the books on July 1. But it's not just passing those laws, it's making sure that everybody knows that those laws are on the books and that they can go and do these things and exercise their right to vote. And we know that this is what our party is about fundamentally. And so we've got to take our message to the voters. And so to you guys, I say thank you. To the state delegates, I say stick with us. We're almost done with this convention, but we love you guys so much. And it's been my honor to moderate this panel. Happy Father's Day to all those out there who are celebrating. And Andrew, take it away, man. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jay.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Delegate. We appreciate you all. And I think that there's a point that I want to make is what Sia mentioned earlier, which is one of the true missed opportunities because of the certain situations that we find ourselves in is that you guys can't do your victory lap that you all need to do. This General Assembly session was historic in so many ways. And it's harder just because of the situation that we find ourselves in, for you guys to really let every corner of Virginia know, no matter if you're in Lee County, no matter if you're on the Eastern Shore, in Fairfax, Richmond, or Southside, just how impactful this session was. And so we appreciate your leadership, Congressman. We appreciate your leadership as well. Keep fighting the good fight. Hold our president accountable, and good luck on Tuesday. So now I wanted to, we're getting ready. This is the last panel of today, and I wanted to bring in a couple of really good friends of mine to talk about a couple of things that I think to wrap us up are really important. If you're a new delegate, if you're new to this process, you heard from our speakers yesterday about the importance of getting involved in what is the most important election of all of our lifetimes. And so I wanted to provide a little bit of an opportunity for folks to know just how to get involved. It's harder. It's harder sometimes if you don't know some of the players in the party about just how to make that first step. And so I wanted to bring in a couple of folks who really know how to do that. One, Fernando Mercado, he's a friend of mine who ran or was a state director for Vice President Biden's campaign in Virginia during the primary. And then we have the amazing Ivana Hall, who was my deputy last year as coordinated campaign director. I know Ivana, we don't like that word coordinated, but take the majority director. Co-director, she was amazing, and she's actually up in Pennsylvania right now fighting the good fight with the Pennsylvania Dems. So I wanted to start off by asking you guys, Fernando, you were involved with the Biden campaign. You've been involved since the beginning. If somebody, to those state delegates or to the random person who's out there watching right now, how do I get involved? If that's a question that they ask themselves, what can they do? What's the most impactful way that they can get started right now as a state delegate?
Thank you so much for having me. I think the best way to get involved is to go to joebiden.com/organize now. There you will see a menu of great options. And before I get into all those options, I just want to talk a little bit more broadly about what our campaign is doing to be creative and getting to meet voters where they are and start mobilizing momentum for November and getting our volunteers ready to go. And in this environment that we're in. So the first thing is you could call folks in Virginia, call other Biden supporters, check in on them. Things are difficult right now. Like the vice president said, we're dealing with two crises right now. People need to be checked in on, and that's something that our campaign is providing. That's like the type of empathetic and grounded leadership that Joe Biden is all about. So we want to check in on folks. The second thing is we want to host a virtual meeting. You could propose an event, and these events are great because it allows you to use your network to bring into the campaign, and you can make it about an issue you particularly care about. You can make it about a constituency-based event. I know that there are folks that are going to be celebrating Colombian Independence Day with Joe Biden and just bring in a lot of people from their neighborhood and things like that into a virtual event. All types of events. We had an event with LGBT veterans in Northern Virginia. That was incredibly successful. Things that bring in your community and to talk about Joe Biden, because people want to know how they can help. People are sick and tired of what's happening in Washington. People are sick and tired of this president. And you, being a state delegate, you're a leader in your community. You need to bring your network in, your friends and family in, and talk to them about, okay, we're all going to be organizers for Joe Biden. The third thing would be to get trained. We have a lot of tools. They're all, we're all digital. We have a strong texting team. We have a strong Slack team. But in order to get up and running with these tools, you're going to have to get trained. So getting educated on how to best use our tools. We ask you that you join. We have live from Philly every day. You can get trained on how to best organize for Joe Biden. If you do that, you'll be equipped with the tools. You'll be able to join our texting team, which is I think like is going to be breaking through in a really strong way and have really strong, meaningful conversations with voters. And then the last thing that I'll end up with is download the Team Joe app, which facilitates the relational organizing. The Team Joe app is something that allows you to really directly get campaign messages to the people already on your phone. You are our biggest tool as a delegate, as a leader, as someone in your community that you know, when you speak, people listen. That matters to us a lot in getting our you know, meeting voters where they are in this environment. It really does take that relational organizing, that voter to voter, neighbor to neighbor contact. And the last thing is, you know, get connected with someone like me, someone from the campaign, your local organizer, and get to work. There are a lot of things that you could be doing right now. The challenge that we have in front of us with social distancing and COVID is we have to be creative. But that is also an opportunity, and I think an exciting one for volunteers on the ground to really, you know, make the campaign their own. This campaign is really about, you know, what we want this country to be, what we want our future to be, and we need to be emblematic of that and get our folks activated and really galvanize our networks. But Andrew, thank you for that. I hope that like broadly answers the question.
Okay, can you hear me now? Cool. All right. Sorry about that little tech glitch. Fernando, what I was saying is that I appreciate you mentioning that. This is an opportunity right now where we can use this current environment to use those relational tactics. Relational organizing tactics, like you just mentioned right now, that we've all tried to implement on campaigns. Ivana and I, you know dang well that you and I talked about this a lot of times, but it's oftentimes really hard to implement because we go from cycle to cycle, and it's hard to sit there in July or August and try to reinvent the wheel. Well, this has forced you guys to reinvent the wheel. And I think that that's really important. Ivana, I'm going to kick it over to you. I'm curious to get your thoughts about this, because you and I worked really well together last year. We obviously had a successful campaign where we flipped the General Assembly. Do you want to follow up, particularly about maybe what you guys are doing in Pennsylvania that maybe we can lean back on in Virginia, and just how we can do a better job about reaching out to our voters during this time and not using the current COVID crisis to be a roadblock in trying to reach out to our voters?
Absolutely. Thank you for that question, Andrew, and good afternoon, everybody. Really happy to be here with you. So something that we're doing really well in Pennsylvania was actually that we did implement a lot of the program from Take the Majority and moving that program over to Pennsylvania. The party there and the director, Sinceri Harris, was very interested in what we did in Virginia last year. And so we not only are we trying to flip the Keystone State for the vice president, but also we have an opportunity in Pennsylvania to flip their General Assembly there, and also have take the majority for Congress and send a majority Democrat delegation from Pennsylvania to Washington. So really looking to implement a lot of the same tools that we used for Take the Majority last year, and having an all-around encompass true coordinated campaign for the first time in Pennsylvania. So that was a big part of using the pod structure with our regional directors so that we can implement and have as many races in our program as much as possible. So that's something that we did that we're currently doing. But really wanting to use the primary as practice. It's the first time that Pennsylvania has had vote by mail. So really wanting to get this process right. And so really flipping, with me starting the job after 3 weeks, really flipping the program to a digital organizing program, which was very hard and difficult, but the team took it and ran with it. So we really have using phone banking as a tool heavily was really important. We saw our contact rates from phone banking, which normally hover around 8 to 9%. Our phone banking contact rates went up 15 to 18%, right? So that started to become as good as a door knock when we don't have to social distance. So heavy phone banking, but also having a dialer program, implementing a dialer program really quickly was also valuable. And then using text systems within dialer programs. So being able to text people the link of where to sign up for vote by mail to receive their ballots was a new tool that we used as well. And then also texting, getting out as many text messages as possible, again, using those digital links. And we could also track the activity of those links and how many people were now clicking on those links after they open up their text messages was something that we were able to do as well. So really utilizing digital organizing in this time and digital tools has been really important. We were able to have Democrats request 1.3 million ballots compared to 500,000 Republicans who only requested their ballots. So we were very happy with that. But really being creative in this time has allowed us to really have some fun with this, but also reach voters in different ways that we hadn't before.
That's really helpful to hear from. I mean, again, you and I had this conversation in 2019 about how to do this, but again, like this current situation that we find ourselves in with COVID and everything has really forced us to be creative and to get it right. Ivana, I'm going to stick with you for just 1 second. I know that a lot of folks on here, and if you tuned into our In the Know session from last month with Chris Bowling, with Trevor Sutherland, and with Christina, the EDs of the House and Senate caucuses, you heard Chris talk about why last year we didn't use the word coordinated. And some of the branding that we tried to use. Do you want to talk about that process and just how I guess that a lot of folks in Virginia kind of associate and lump coordinated and Virginia Democrats together. They don't necessarily understand that there's two different organizations, even if we're kind of pseudo linked. And so I want to see if you could provide the delegation and anybody that's joining with a little bit of an explanation about those differences and how they matter when people are trying to figure out how they get involved.
Absolutely. I think the biggest thing when people think about coordinated is that you have one entity running everything, calling the shots, right? And so what was different about our program last year was that the Democratic Party was one of many table partners who were also making the decisions, right? So we had the House Democrats and the Senate Democrats who were also table partners who were making key decisions on this campaign and how we move forward as well. We also had members of the DLCC and the Way Ahead PAC as well. And so they were included on those big decisions. And at the end of the day, we would take votes, right? And decide what was the best way moving forward rather than just one entity making that decision. And so I think there's this idea that you have one person, particularly the party, running these programs. But last year, we wanted to make sure that everyone was at the table and everyone was making prime decisions for, whether that was universes, who we were talking to, the support that a candidate was getting. And that's very important. And that representation is important. And also thinking about, when you're branding and you're calling something Take the Majority in Pennsylvania, we're back to Blue PA. That is because this isn't just one entity running these programs. Again, we have table partners, and so they have as much of a decision and a hand in how our team moves forward, just as much as anyone else. And so that is really, really, really important. And then I also think just the communication structure of our campaign last year was very important, right? Using our pod directors to have unilateral communications with our campaign managers is very, very important, and really working hand in hand with campaign managers and the candidates was so valuable. Our team was their team. We worked in the same offices. The communication was there. And so when you over communicate what the strategy is for these candidates and letting them know that we are here to support them and we work for them and with them, I think that ultimately changed the faces of coordinated in Virginia moving forward.
You know, what a lot of folks don't realize is just the amount of collaboration we try to end up doing. Obviously, we can't include everybody because just decision making becomes hard when you do that. But that's important to make sure that we are moving forward and that we are trying to include everybody's voices, whether it's our C3 partners, whether it's everybody else. So Fernando, I'm going to give you the last word on this panel because again, I think that we're going to hear from Delegate Aird next about kind of a pseudo call to action and how our delegation here can really use the last few days to focus their energy and their resolve to elect Joe Biden, to re-elect our congresswomen and maybe add another one in CD5 and 6 and others. But then also to make sure we re-elect Mark Warner and take back the Senate. So for Fernando, I just want to ask you again for the final word here, how, very specifically, what can we do to elect Joe Biden? What's the easiest way to do that? How can they sign? How can people sign up? And what is the most impactful action that they can make right now if people are nervous about getting involved or if they are nervous about coming out of their homes during this COVID crisis?
Thanks. I think the important thing is educating yourselves on the tools we have available. So we'll help you build up your virtual events that instead of being able to knock somebody's door, you'll invite them into your Zoom. And finding a way that you could be creative with a virtual event that will get people to join. And one interesting thing about this virtual environment that we're in is that we can have very impactful conversations even if we are distant. We can bring in we had a climate roundtable where we brought in Jennifer McClellan, Elaine Luria, Donald McKeechin. They were all one was in DC, one was in Richmond, one was in Hampton Roads, but they came in and they spoke about their work to help our planet, and people that were motivated by that signed up and watched and were able to have that conversation in their living rooms. Those are the kind of things that we'll be able to provide to get more people in and get people activated with our campaign. So we need you to take the leadership in hosting these virtual events. The second thing is, we are in a new digital world where everybody needs to be comfortable texting out the vote. We have a very robust, dynamic texting program. We were able to get 900 Virginians to an organizing training with Mayor Pete Buttigieg a couple of weeks ago, and we got that out because we have a texting army, and that texting army is only going to get more powerful. And you can have very meaningful conversations via text. But all this to say, folks need to get educated on how to be super volunteers in this social distant environment. And that starts with going to joebiden.com/organize now. Take the time to meet with an organizer. They can download all this information to you so you know how to use the tools. Sit in on a digital organizing training that happens daily. We have digital organizers in Philly whose whole job is to teach folks how to use our tools. Download the Team Joe app. That is our app that we've created that gives us the ability to share the messages that we want to share with our folks leading our relational organizing program. So those are the three big pillars that all of us should take in if we're and it's the new normal that we have to all do. So I think that the important thing is to get educated with all the tools we have available, take an active step, be creative. I think an important thing to realize is that we may not have all the answers as a campaign because none of us have done a presidential campaign during COVID.
Yeah.
So we're going to need your creativity. We're going to need your leadership. We're going to need your voice to bring people in. And let me tell you, one of the things that I'm inspired by is that there is so much energy to help Joe Biden get elected, to help Democrats get elected. The country is ready for real leadership. And we need to be able to provide and harness that energy. And we need your help to do that. And we need your help to provide the space and virtual venues to get people more involved. And the way that the relational organizing piece works is you host a virtual event, you inspire somebody else that attends your virtual event to reach out to their network and their network. and their, you know, and their colleagues and their family members. And, you know, piece by piece, this is something we can all do right now, that will help spread the word about Joe Biden's vision on specific policies, and just overall understand that, like, people want real leadership.
Right.
And Joe Biden is the person that's going to restore the soul of this country. And people are ready for change. So we have to be the ones that bring it to them.
100%. And Fernando, I just want to, for the delegation out there watching, or if you are like not a part of the delegation or member of the general public, you can always email us at Virginia at the party. Sorry, I hit my mic there. At political@vademocrats.org, and we can hook you guys up and make sure that you guys are connected, whether it's with Fernando or other folks that Fernando mentioned, that is there in Philadelphia, ready to go, and ready to help you guys get involved and get started on this. I think it's really important that we do that. I'll also put a plug in, if you're interested in the Virginia Coordinated Campaign, which we have going right now with Mark Warner, and our congressional campaigns. You can also reach out to me about those. I'm happy to field questions there. It's an interesting time to be a Virginia Democrat, right? And we are evolving, and we're making sure that we can adapt to this crisis, just like what we're doing here with our first ever convention. So Fernando, Ivana, I want to thank you guys for joining us and kind of like helping to wrap up our virtual convention last panel here with how people can be focused and get involved. Appreciate you guys. And I'm hopeful that pretty soon maybe we can have a virtual beer at a bar and be safe in doing it. So appreciate you all. I want to, but before I let Delegate Aird take the floor here with kind of a call to action, I want to just preface a couple things. You know, Delegate Aird has been since whenever I got involved. Or whenever I became the ED of the party, has been somebody that has been a mentor, who's been somebody who has let me know like when she disagrees or agrees with whatever decisions we make, and she's been so helpful in making sure that we adapt to these challenging times. And so when I asked her about this virtual convention, and I showed her the draft agenda that we were making, she'd mentioned we need something to kind of close up and to focus our delegation, to focus those that were watching, to make sure that they know this is what they need to do after this convention, to focus your energy and everybody's just our resolve to make sure that we elect Joe Biden and others. So I thought it was very fitting that I asked her to deliver that call to action. So Delegate Aird, I appreciate your friendship, and I will let you have the floor.
Good afternoon, Virginia Democrats. I'm LaSharice Aird, State Representative of the 63rd District and proud Chair of the 4th Congressional District. It is my distinct privilege to be able to address you during this historic virtual convention. I hope you've listened intensely to all of the amazing leaders that have addressed you over the past few days. As our celebration of Democratic leaders comes to an end, this next part is on you. This next part is on us. In an amazing show of solidarity throughout the last few weeks, the international community in places like Germany, Italy, France, Denmark, Syria, Poland, Canada, Australia, I could go on with this list. They've demonstrated just how much the pain that we were feeling as Americans pierced their hearts as well. In all 50 of our states, from large cities to small towns, people everywhere have taken to the streets to demand justice for far too many lives that have been lost due to senseless hate. Virginia Democrats, far too many Americans voted in 2016 for a candidate that they knew represented hate and frightened the overwhelming majority of, dare I say, non-white citizens. And with their selection, they sacrificed us against our will. As we look around, we know that sacrifice has resulted in the continuous spilling of Black blood. We can't let this go on, and we can never let this sacrifice from voters happened again. Since January 20th of 2017, the charge for that hate we have seen directly be fueled from the White House. Virginia Democrats, it's time for us to evict the tenant in the White House. Everything around us is in flames, but I promise we can slowly begin to put out that fire, beginning with what we do in November. But the only way to do that is if we can stand together. I need you to be part of the army of canvassers, phone texters, phone bankers, postcard writers, support staff for every single one of our Democratic candidates up and down the ticket, and most importantly, Vice President Joe Biden. Every moment of every day from here on out is an organizing opportunity that I need you to take advantage of. Every person that you come in contact with is a chance to make someone an activist, a chance to grow every individual in your community as part of this movement as we head into November. You know, every unimaginable accomplishment that we've ever been able to conquer here in this country has been as a result of us coming together with great organization and pushing to the end. The decision, Virginia Democrats, to mobilize and organize is right here, right now. It's now. Together with you, I know we can do this. So if you haven't already, please sign up to work on a campaign, any campaign up and down our ticket of Democratic leaders, and help get them the support they need to push them over the finish line into November. Stay close in contact with the Democratic Party of Virginia. Make sure you're signed up to receive our updates. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for all the hard work you've already put in to get us here, but we have a long way to go, and I hope that together we can get there. Thank you so much, and please, please, please take care, be safe, and stay healthy.
Thank you, Delegate Aird. Appreciate your words there. Very fitting to wrap up this first ever virtual convention. I'm going to turn the floor over to our chairwoman, Susan Swecker, who we've saved the best for last, I think, chairwoman with Senator Lucas. But I will let you have the floor, and we will deliver our closing remarks.
Thank you, Andrew, and thanks for your hard work and the work of the staff. Best state party staff in the country, I have to say. So please give them a virtual round of applause for making this run so smoothly. And now it's my pleasure to begin to conclude our 2020 state convention. I am so proud. I'm just so proud to be joined by one of my closest friends in the General Assembly, our Democratic Party Vice Chair of Outreach, and the first Black woman to serve as President Pro Tem of the Virginia Senate, Senator Louise Lucas. Louise, it's great to see you, and I'm going to now turn this over to you.
Thank you, Susan. It is always great to see you, my friend. My fellow Democrats, I want to thank you for coming together for this exciting and inspiring virtual convention. It was a joy to watch 3 days of conversations and speeches by some of my favorite Democratic leaders. Yesterday, Vice President Biden reminded us, amidst the crisis that we are facing and the crisis that we're experiencing, that none of us can afford to be silent. We can't afford to be silent while COVID-19 is continuing to ravage this country and Donald Trump is putting people at risk. We can't afford to be silent while our friends and neighbors are struggling in a broken economy. And we can't afford to be silent amidst unprecedented protests against police brutality and systemic racism. Over the next 4 months, let's resolve to continue speaking out and pushing forward for change. If there's one thing that the past 3 days have made clear, is that the Democratic Party will not be silent. And we continue to stand on the side of justice and equality. Thank you so much to my friend, DPVA Chair Susan Swecker, and everyone at the Democratic Party of Virginia for organizing this convention, bringing in so many fantastic speakers, and unifying our party behind our nominee, Joe Biden. We have a lot of work to do ahead. But I'm confident that come November, Virginians will vote to elect Joe Biden, Mark Warner, and all of our Democratic congressmen and women. So let's get this done and keep up the good work as we march towards justice and a Democratic wave in November. And Susan, I can't thank you enough for your friendship and for all the hard work that you and everybody at DPVA do to help Democrats all across this state.
Thank you so much, Senator Lucas, for those inspiring remarks and helping us close out our 2020 state convention. Many of us watching today know you for your life's work and dedication to fairness and to justice. For those who are a little newer to this process, I want to make sure you know what an inspiring leader Louise is. She has spent her entire life working to make her city of Portsmouth, her district, and the Commonwealth a better place. First as a mayor, and now as a state senator. And thanks to the trifecta we won last year, she's, as I said before, the chair of Senate Education and Health Committee, and the first ever African-American woman to serve as President Pro Tem. And I finally get to say these two words, Madam President. This woman wakes up every morning working to make a better Virginia. This past session, her successful bill to end Lee Jackson Day and make Election Day a state holiday is not only symbolic, but has real positive consequences for everyday Virginians. Of course, for those who are true leaders like Louise, who speak with a powerful voice, who are women of courage, come the ridiculous comments and attacks. In this case, by some far-fringe voters who want to recall her because they're more upset about a Confederate statue being taken down than the murder of George Floyd. I have news for them. We stand with Louise, and we will continue to stand up for her the way she stood up for us. And let's also stand up for truth, justice, and fairness. Let's stand up to the racist, sexist, cruel homophobe who runs a criminal enterprise out of the White House. Like you, I'm ready to say a big old don't let the door hit your big old butt on the way out. And to Donald Trump and his corrupt family and cronies. And notice I said but in case any kids are watching. I'm ready to restore honor and decency and integrity to 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. And we can do that when we elect Joe Biden President of the United States. Wouldn't it be great to have a president who has a heart and shows compassion for everyone? I want to thank each of you again who have joined us this weekend. Thank you to our speakers and panelists who provided great insights and inspired us. And thank you again to the best state party staff I could ever have. They are just a role model and inspiration. And during all of this challenge, I want to say, they never said we can't do this. They got up every day, goal-focused on what we needed to do. And also thank you to all the many, many volunteers who made this possible. This isn't going to be an easy election, but nothing worth fighting for ever is. These next 135 days are going to be the most critical of our lifetime. Now, music has consoled me and lifted my spirits since that dark night of November 8th, 2016. And if you know me, you're likely aware that I really like traditional country music, but I also love gospel music. These last weeks, I've listened to and hummed many versions of We Shall Not Be Moved, an old gospel song, a union protest song, turned civil rights anthem that was sung at the March on Washington. The theme is rooted in Scripture, in the book of Jeremiah. We shall not be we shall not be moved. Just like a tree planted by the water, we shall not be moved. Virginia Democrats, we know our task at hand. We are laser focused. We shall not be moved. Whatever comes our way, we shall not be moved. We are up to the challenge. We will elect Joe Biden President of the United States. We will re-elect Mark Warner to the United States Senate. We shall not be moved. We shall grow our congressional delegation and elect Democrats up and down the ballot. We shall not be moved. I look forward to seeing you virtually or maybe even in person on the campaign trail. And it's my great honor now to formally adjourn the 2020 Virginia Democratic Party Convention. We stand adjourned.